That's Buckminster Fuller, thinking, which is what he does most of the time, think and communicate his thinking to others in an almost non-stop globe-circling tour to speak to people who have asked him to come and share his thoughts with them. He goes only by invitation. He never prepares a speech. He uses no notes. And he declares that in these spontaneous encounters with people who have asked him to come and speak to them, that he himself is constantly learning new things, constantly breaking new ground, stimulated in large measure by eye contact with those to whom he has come to speak.
If I can't see the eyes of the people that I'm meeting with, I really cannot carry on this way. So that I've had several times to ask people to change the lights and stages so you can really communicate, because your eyes do communicate very powerfully.
Fuller simply will not speak in a darkened room where he can't see the eyes of his audience. Now, what is this thought that has made him so important to the world? Well, we know him chiefly for the geodesic dome. This is the culmination of a whole series of inventions and discoveries. The geodesic structure is the most economical way known to man to enclose space. Less material goes into a geodesic structure than into any other kind of structure enclosing the same space or covering the same area. The weight of one of Fuller's huge domes, like the Montreal Expo 250-foot diameter sky break bubble, is approximately 1/2 of 1% of the weight of a hen's eggshell magnified to the same dimensions. The huge eggshell, a 250-foot eggshell, would weigh 125,000 tons. Fuller's big dome weighs 600 tons. Fuller domes are found around the world now, housing radar installations in the north, a concert hall in Honolulu built for the Kaiser Aluminum Company, a railway repair center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and innumerable homes for people. If Bucky Fuller had pocketed all the money due him on royalties from geodesic designs, he'd be very wealthy. But instead, he's plowed everything back into research. And here's where his researches have led him, above everything else, to a conviction that if man's mind is released to do its best work on behalf of man, then it will constantly lead us into better and better strategies and technologies for survival. Just as the dome allowed us to enclose more space with less material, other technologies will allow us to travel faster using less energy, to produce more food from less land, always more with less. Do more with less, Bucky says. That's what it's all about. Man is designed, Fuller says, to be a success. There's no need for a constant series of wars to cut down the population. If we'll concentrate our energies on always increasing our capability to do more with less, then there will be always enough food and clothing and shelter for everyone. And the old idea that the strong survive at the expense of the weak is really based on a false perception of man's true relationship to the natural universe. That's Fuller's most revolutionary message, and he's prepared to prove it. Now, what we asked him to do here in Vancouver in the spring of 1973, when he was 78 years old, was to tell us how he does his work, how the inventor invents, how the discoverer discovers. And characteristically, as he does when asked to explain anything, Buckminster Fuller went back to his own immediate and rather ordinary experience.
Number one, I was born very cross-eyed. And the family doctor in the vicinity of Boston where I was born, 1895, said, we don't know much about those eyes. They're very, very complicated. One thing we know is not to try to do any experimental work about that cross-eyedness. So I did stay cross-eyed until I was 4. And then they took me to the eye doctor and found the lenses in my eyes were misshapen and needed very powerful lens correction. So they gave me that correction, and I have exactly the same correction still. It's very interesting going through then 74 years of the same correction. You have to have amplification, have a little more just power put in, as you would with a looking glass, been added in the later years, but the same lens correction. So all I have to do is to take off my glasses to see what I saw before I was 4 years of age. And I'll tell you, all I see is a blur. Now, having had that kind of vision until 4, yet my smelling was very acute, and the hearing was very acute, and so and my tactile, I suppose, were brought into greater use. And it never occurred to me until I was 4 that what I saw wasn't what everybody else was seeing. Why would it? I had an older sister, 3 years older, and she would tell me the things she could see. Now, all of us are given extraordinary imagination, imaginative capability. So when she told me what she could see, I thought she was making up stories, and I thought they were great. And I didn't want to be outdone, so I'd tell all the things I could see. And I was always getting a laugh, and she never got a laugh, and I thought I was doing great. Then you can imagine my surprise when I suddenly saw that with my glasses, and I saw human eyes, and I saw the things she'd been talking about. And I realized that she had not been telling stories. Now, by this time, I got a reputation in the family for being amusing, you see. So they kept sort of encouraging the storytelling, and that made me turn in later on being called kind of a liar, because they knew I could see by now and that I was still playing games. Now, this would be kind of challenging. Get yourself under control, and not be identified as a liar. However, I'm sure that this did play quite a part in my life, in the sense I really had a complete retake at 4 years of age. It was very, very much of a birth. All you have to do is think about what you really do see in human eyes, and I was absolutely astounded by eyes. Not only the eyes of the human beings, but the eyes of creatures. And this cat had just been sort of a fuzzy thing, and suddenly there it had eyes. And it looked me in the eye, and I looked it in the eye, and we got communicating. And I got looking at snakes in the eye, and I was really fascinated by trying to communicate with the eyes of the creatures. I used to fill my blouse with snakes and frogs and everything. I thought we were really getting on great. It's a big new surprise. Then I found people didn't like you to have your blouse full of snakes. And so that's enough of that chapter. Then my father died, and I was really very young. And my mother would say, now, this friend of your father's is taking a great deal of trouble to talk to you. He's a very busy man, and I'd say, he'd say things to me. I didn't feel that. I didn't necessarily feel what he was saying seemed to agree with the way I was analyzing things. And my mother said, never mind, pay no attention. Never mind what you think. Listen to this man. He's taking a whole lot of trouble to talk to you, and he knows what he's talking about. And my mother sent me to a school that cost her quite a little money, and she was not well off at all. And so I knew how much she loved me, and she sent me there because she was sure that they knew what they're talking about. And so I really continually found myself not quite in agreement with the things I was hearing. I decided I was just a little queer. And I just had to put up with living with me because I didn't seem to see things the way other people did. And having had this experience of learning that I hadn't seen the way my sister did, it really made me probably very, very, very tolerant of listening to other man's ideas and learning not to listen to my own.
Fuller married Anne Hewlett on his 22nd birthday. He had begun a promising naval career. For a while it looked as if his whole life would be filled with successes. But their first child died of meningitis and polio, and then all of his post-war enterprises seemed to be doomed to failure. And by the time their second child arrived, 1927, when Bucky was 32, he had come to the conclusion that he was doing more harm than good in the world.
By this time, I'd learned to play all kinds of games that men were teaching me to play, but I was not doing my own thinking. This is the way you play economic games, this is the way you get on, and so forth. And I had really contradictory counsel without knowing it was so, and I trying to just play the game by the other man's rules rather than doing my own thinking. I came into really some head-on collision. About the time this new child, just the time this new child was born, we were absolutely dead broke. We were remote, we were in Chicago, and no money, and here was this beautiful new life. And I said, well, as far as I can see, I really made a mess of things. I haven't been doing my own thinking, and maybe the best thing to do is to get me out of the way. While my mother was still alive, and my father-in-law was still alive, I said, it could be that they, even though they're not well-to-do, they could look out for my wife and child better than I'm doing if I get out of the way. If I don't, I think I ought to have a very good reason for not getting myself out of the way. So I said, there were two, three decisions that came in here. One was, I think it could be a very clear matter if you really, to the best of your capability, from this point on, if you assume that your life was committed entirely for other human beings and not for yourself, then I would think that this would be one wise to not get yourself out of the way. That on the basis that there is some kind of a bundle of experience. And there might be in the pains that you've had clues to the way in which others might not have to go through what you've gone through. And that then I said, all right, if you're going to do your own thinking, going on your own experience, I would think that because I've said of all the things that I think have been powerful that I know about it in my life is love. So I think inasmuch as you did accept beliefs in love, in love for the people who gave you the love, you really have a first challenge of thinking, which is to say, is there anything in your own experience that suggests to you that there is a greater intellect operative in our universe than that of man? I had luckily had a good scientific education, and I said I'm absolutely overwhelmed by the principles which are manifest, that are utterly reliable, which in order to qualify as principles have to have no exception in science, mass interaction or refraction of light, or whatever it may be, and that these, in order to be then qualify as principles, they have to be inherently eternal. They don't have exception. That there is a complex of eternal principles, none of which contradict one another, all of which are interaccommodative, and some of them interaccommodated at exponential rates of interaccommodation, would seem to me to be, what I'm experiencing qualifies as a design, that is, an intellectual interaccommodation. This is only intellectually discoverable, and would seem to manifest intellect. And it seemed to me then manifest an intellectually designed, eternally regenerative universe. So I said, this is so obviously greater than man, the integrity by virtue of which the interaction of the moon and the earth, and the whole planetary interaction, and life being kept alive on board of our planet by radiation from the sun 92 million miles away. Most extraordinary design. And I'm so overwhelmed by it that I automatically then say, I don't think I have any word adequate. And though man has invented a sound that in our particular part of the world, you say word God, and it might be another sound elsewhere. Whatever it is so great that it's beyond any limited life to be able to really give an adequate name, other than just identify there is an a priori intellectual integrity manifest in our universe. This was where I certainly found myself starting and having more and more confidence then in the idea of really committing yourself in a very, very, very important way to whatever the great design might be trying to accomplish.
When he found the principles of the geodesic dome, Fuller felt that he was simply going along with nature. Nature created the principles. Fuller discovered them by cooperating with nature.
I have found myself inadvertently opening up curtain and having new vistas time and again. And because I can say, and you can say, that everything that man has discovered, the very word discovery, means it was previously unknown. that everything of great importance that man has discovered, all the great generalized principles, have been as a consequence of the gradual pulling aside of a curtain of the unknown. So the source of all of our knowledge is previously unknown. So that there has been no instance so far suggesting a slowing down of the curtains being pulled aside. There's no suggestion that all the unknown is now known. In fact, it would really, there's no periodicity or any rhythm that I can find, any trending in lines or against time, suggesting that we now have everything. There's nothing more coming in. I would assume that we are so far very, very meagerly informed.
The conventional image of the scientist, the investigator, is of the man who sets out to tackle a problem that nobody else has been able to deal with. And he batters away at it, and he brings whatever assistance he can find, and he focuses it on this closed door. As I listen to you talk, and have listened to you talk over all these years and read your books, I think I come up, and I think what you were telling me this morning is a very different kind of picture. In a way, it's a picture of a person who, as he moves through life, keeps his eyes very much open for those doors that are open, and has perhaps, if he's different from other people in any way, it's because he's always watching for the open doors. And he moves through them. In a sense, you're seeking the path of least resistance rather than hammering away at the closed door. And as you move through those doors, you find that there are some surprises.
Indeed.
On the door frames, almost, as you go through. So that it's not a question of saying, how can I cure cancer? How can I do this? How can I do that? It's a question of saying, isn't that fascinating? Now let's turn it over. Oh, let's see what comes out of that. And then you pursue and pursue. And as an investigator, you're constantly surprised. Am I correct about that?
That is correct.
Do you feel, you've said that I'm more or less correct in describing your posture and the way in which you move through life. Do you feel that this is something that anyone can learn? Is it a posture that anyone can adopt?
I'm absolutely convinced that I have no faculties that others do not have. I think everybody has some special circumstance I put down yesterday where I happen to be born cross-eyed, and there are balancing strategies that occur. I think that if anything really unique is what has inspired me to do what I do, to make up my mind to really go all out. And that, there's no question about it, it always goes back to love. Anything really just moved me my whole life. Nothing, there's love. Whether it's feeling the love that I did feel, given to me by others when I was young, how really fantastically beautiful it is. And the spontaneous love you have for the others, and for your parents, for that little child. So it's been love that's been, nothing can be more mysterious to me. As I say, stones don't love stones. And it's not just that master and attraction at all. There's something else going on there. So I think the most mysterious of all the synergies I know is the phenomenon of love. It seems to be, I find love seems to be very close to the phenomena of gravity. And I said something to you yesterday as an audience that I said about 2 months ago, for the first time that I said it out loud to somebody else. I was asked to come to the Enrico Fermi laboratory at the Chicago University. The man who is now the head of it is Humberto Fernandez Moran. He is from Venezuela. And he asked me to meet with his whole laboratory staff, and he wanted me to talk to them. And his head mathematical physicist is from Cambridge University in England, a very brilliant man. And I said to them, it's worthwhile noticing that radiation casts shadows and gravity does not. And the mathematical physicist of Cambridge University I'm sure that's never been said before. I would then find that love, best I could really say, it is, if it's real love, it's omni-embracing. It makes no exceptions for anything. It doesn't have shadows. I think I've been able to give you an analogy of tension and gravity is circumferential embracing, comes back to itself, has the advantage of closing back in itself to make unity. And radiation tries to go apart. It does go out of these beams, and it is photons and going on that. They're disintegrating and further apart, less and less interaction. But gravity is embracing. I gave you that analogy yesterday. We won't go over that again to the barrel, and so the barrel stays.
In the thinking of Buckminster Fuller, everything in the universe is related to everything else. And indeed, each one of us is a kind of miniature universe. The universe works itself out in billions of different ways, Fuller says, and you and I are just some of the ways in which it does that. Notice how often he comes back to love as a fundamental force in life. I don't know of any other scientist, any other genius of the practical, who is so insistent on the mysterious centrality of love in all of his experience. When he made that extraordinary connection between gravity and love, because neither casts a shadow, I found it pretty head-spinning. I'm not sure I've recovered yet from that one. In this final section now, he talks about the integrity of the universe, and he uses that word to mean the interrelatedness of everything to everything else. Well, more than that, it refers also to the way in which nature tolerates all of its realities, and that when we see conflicts, we're really just failing to see that design intelligence in the universe that keeps everything working in harmony with everything else. Interaccommodation is another one of Fuller's words for this integrity of universe. This last section is a good demonstration of the way in which he feels everything related to everything else in his own experience, like the unlikely connection between love and gravity. He's going to talk more about love and gravity. I'll ask him to discuss sexual love in that connection, and he'll begin with what first seems to be a detour into Henry Ford and mass production. But it's not a detour, it's really a characteristic concern to put everything into context. Integrity again. He begins by talking about what happens to this investigator who goes through life opening doors of experience and following the paths he sees before him. Does such a journey take the investigator any closer to knowing everything? Fuller says no. It's the opposite.
Fundamentally, in every way, we just simply find the great mystery increasing. But as the verities are disclosed to us, as the curtain is pulled aside, it is always to disclose increasing integrity.
Increasing integrity.
Yeah. But more of the integrity. Integrity could not be increased. Yeah. Integrity is integrity.
It discloses more of the integrity.
More of the integrity is manifest.
Does it also not disclose more mystery?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, let's come back to love, then. And love, I hear you saying, is essentially mysterious and partakes of that same metaphysical...
I think it is a great metaphysical gravity. I mean, it's great. It's really the greater integrity, because gravity is very fantastic. And it's very fantastic that that's the gravity goes to work like that so quickly. But it's much more important that you find this love. I can't see that, Paul, but there is a beautiful thing. We feel it all the time. We're so afraid of being exploited, or humanity, poor darling little innocent humanity, so scared of getting caught soft, it doesn't like to admit it. It feels that love all the time.
Now, what about that other feeling that is commonly called love?
Called what?
Love, namely sexuality.
Yeah.
Where does that intersect? Sexuality seems to me, in your metaphor, to be much more of a direct line.
Well, I said the effect of one another on each other is we all go into orbit.
Yeah.
But every once in a while we get into what they call critical proximity, and one falls in on the other. Now, this critical proximity is a very rare matter. You and I are living where this does go on here, so we're terribly aware of it because we're in the critical proximity area. When Henry Ford began to get into mass production of parts for automobiles, he had to be interchangeable parts, and he had therefore to have very little, he should have little tolerance for error, or they wouldn't be interchangeable. So in designing and engineering, you have how much error can you tolerate, and the less error there is, the more efficient it is, and less energy wasted in frictions, etc., and less repair. He was, in order then to get into inside and outside dimensionings and so forth, and there's spaces between things, there were very extraordinary, the calipers for measuring outside and gauge knife distances between two. There were extraordinary Scandinavians, Johansen, developed the Johansen gauges, gauge blocks, where they're really considerable distances, not just a little leaf distance apart. But they had to be absolutely accurate distances apart. And the Johansen developed by far the most accurate gauges known at the time of old Henry Ford. They were so beautifully machined, their surfaces, that if you took two Johansen gauge blocks and put them together, the space between them was less than a molecule of atmosphere, of the gaseous atmosphere. Therefore, a molecule could not come in between the two, therefore you couldn't pull them apart. There's nothing to go in to fill. You could only slide them apart. But if you didn't slide them apart, very soon they would not move. Why? Because they got where the atoms were literally in critical proximity, and they would then literally coalesce and became pure metal again.
Literally? Wow.
I would see that this critical proximity thing is a very, very delicate matter, and that it's only the thickness of that thin paper mass out from our Earth where you no longer are falling into anything. That's an awfully short distance, 100 miles, and the next nearest star, 92 million miles. The next nearest star is I think, 6.5 trillion miles away. So we're 99.9999999% of all the universe, you don't fall into anything. So falling in is something very extraordinary. So you talk about the sexual one. If it really is something you call really a falling in love, independent of what we would call then the metaphysical embracement and tolerance of all, I would call that, that's what you get when setting me in orbit, you then what you call critical proximity.
I don't believe that you believe that it's quite that mechanical.
I'm talking about the pull. I'm talking about the attraction. That's all I'm talking about.
On orbiting, another detail that we went by.
Because a lot of people are orbiting by, and you say, very beautiful. But there's really quite some difference when there's suddenly something lights up between people and there's a pull.
Yeah.